and Commissioner elections. And the fact of the matter is, what people in Wales want, Mr. Speaker, is public services that match what is being delivered by this Conservative government in England. What people want, Mr. Speaker, is waiting lists that are the same as what is being delivered in England, education standards that are the same, and standards in public life that reflect what we expect from members of Parliament in the United Kingdom. And that's not what we're getting under this Welsh Labour government.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Water is a devolved matter in Wales, and therefore rivers and streams in Wales are the responsibility of the Welsh Government. The UK Government recognises that rivers are an essential part of our natural environment, and that is why we are working on the UK National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan.
Mr. Speaker, won't the Minister fess up to the fact that the real scandal in Wales is that this government keeps denigrating a good Welsh government that in terms of biodiversity and so much else is better than what's happening in the rest of the UK. On biodiversity, 3 times better than England. Isn't it about time we got a few Welsh ideas and Welsh leaders to help us clean up our act and our rivers?
Well, that was a good attempt, Mr. Speaker, but I simply cannot disagree with the honourable gentleman more. It is this government that has forced the water companies to provide £56 billion towards investment in the storm overflow network, improving water quality across England. But in Wales, the picture could not be more different. The average number of sewage spills per outflow is 38. In England, it's 23. Our record speaks for itself.
Chair of the Select Committee, Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And firstly, thank you for clarifying the sub judice rules in relation to Park Prison. I think MPs across South Wales were disappointed that the urgent question was declined yesterday, but we understand why, and we will continue to seek answers and to scrutinise the Minister over the deeply distressing events that are happening right now and the way that prison is being run. On the subject of pollution, thousands of Pembrokeshire residents continue to have their lives blighted by air pollution and fears about water pollution from the Withyhedge landfill site. Given that the ministers in Wales responsible for overseeing the public health and the environmental regulatory response both voted last week to block an independent investigation into the financial dealings between the owner of that site and the First Minister, how on earth can my constituents have confidence that their concerns will be addressed impartially and the problems resolved?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend lives this issue on a daily basis, and I commend him for highlighting the plight of his constituents who have to endure the impact of this devastating environmental pollution. Mr. Speaker, any way you look at it, this donation stinks. And I think it is shameful that the Welsh Government are evading scrutiny on this issue. It is simply his constituents can have no confidence that this matter will be investigated. There is no independent scrutiny here, and I think Labour members opposite should explain why they are scared of scrutiny on this.
Liz Twist.
Question 3, Mr. Speaker.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 3, 8 and 12 together. The UK Government fully recognises the challenges posed by cost of living pressures that have come about as a result of COVID and the invasion of Ukraine, which is why it is committed to the triple lock on pensions for this Parliament, increase the living wage benefiting 140,000 people in Wales, and put an average of £700 back into the pocket of a typical worker in Wales through national insurance cuts.
Liz Twist.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Trussell Trust says that 1/5 of people in Wales have cut back on or skipped meals in the last 12 months. What conversations is the Minister having with supermarkets about holding down the cost of food for customers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that many supermarkets are indeed supporting food banks within their local areas, and the UK Government have certainly wanted to support those with the least by making sure that pensions, that benefits, that the minimum wage all go up in line with inflation, and to make extra payments on top to pensioners, to those on benefits and to households where there is disability. But if the honourable lady is truly concerned about cost of living pressures in Wales, perhaps she ought to be asking her colleagues in the Welsh Labour Government why on this very day Welsh Labour ministers are supporting a plan to create dozens of extra Senedd members at a cost of £120 million, all money which could be far better spent on supporting those with the least.
David.
Is the Secretary of State aware of a study by a Citizens Advice Company which indicates that over 500,000 people in Wales are struggling to make ends meet. If he's aware about it, what's he doing about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already outlined the extra payments that are being made to pensioners, the benefits to those on disability, the fact that pensions, benefits and the minimum wage have all gone up in line with inflation. And on top of that, the UK government have been delivering 5 towns funds, 4 growth deals, 3 rounds of levelling up funding, 2 investment zones, 2 free ports, an electric arc furnace in South Wales, an electrified rail line in North Wales. And what are we getting from the Welsh Labour government, Mr. Speaker? We're getting £120 million being spent on extra Senedd members. While we level up the economy, they want to level up the number of politicians in Cardiff Bay.
Patrick Ready.
Mr. Speaker, he mentioned Ukraine and COVID as contributing factors to the cost of living crisis. He forgot to mention Brexit. Or is he going to try to argue that Brexit has somehow improved things and made goods and services cheaper for people in Wales?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be only too delighted to mention Brexit, which was voted for by a majority in the United Kingdom and a majority in Wales, and point out to the honourable gentleman that since Brexit, the UK has actually grown faster than France and Germany. I could also go on to mention, Mr. Speaker, wasting money on Scottish embassies all around the world, trying to build ferries that haven't yet been floated anywhere, raising taxes and trying to shut down the oil and gas industry in Scotland as measures which are unlikely to support cost of living pressures in Scotland.
Sir Atherton.
Okay, the Development Bank of Wales is supposed to be aiding businesses through cost of living pressures. Does my right honourable friend agree that it's unacceptable that one company received $400,000 from the bank, was then able to give the First Minister of Wales £200,000?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises a very interesting point here. The Development Bank of Wales, which is owned ultimately by the Welsh taxpayers, should be there to support businesses through cost of living pressures. It was able to make a £400,000 loan to a company which was then able to turn round and had £200,000 back in a political donation to enable the First Minister to win the Wales election campaign. Mr. Speaker, it's a very good question. It's not a question for me, it's one that should be answered by the shadow front bench. But on this matter, Mr. Speaker, they have been very silent indeed.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Small businesses, particularly those in retail and hospitality, are directly affected by cost of living challenges that come from the outcome of COVID and the energy price spike from the Ukraine conflict. Therefore, the Chancellor has introduced a 75% business rate relief scheme in England that is supporting businesses in England. Does he share my concern that that funding is not being used to the same degree in Wales, and the business rates in Wales are only being relieved to the rate of 40% and are paying more in tax?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. The UK government made certain that the money for the business rate discount was passed on to the Welsh Labour government. And instead of passing it on to the pubs and restaurants and small businesses that are so vital to communities in Wales, they've decided to spend it on other matters, such as the one they're voting on today. And as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, the average pub in Wales is paying thousands more in business rates than a pub just across the border in England. It is absolutely scandalous, and I would urge the Welsh Labour government to think about where their priorities are.
Minister Executive.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. No contrition then in any of those answers from the Secretary of State, whose party has piled on average £960 extra on the tax bills of around 400,000 pensioners in Wales by freezing tax thresholds. The Prime Minister has now made a totally unfunded £46 billion promise to scrap national insurance. So will the Minister tell us how on earth they're going to pay for it, and will he rule out an 8p rise in income tax or scrapping winter fuel payments to do so?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we made it very clear that we want to keep the triple lock, to continue to ensure that pensions increase in line with inflation. And we're going to afford to do that, Mr. Speaker, by making sure we get growth in the economy, which is why we wanted to end the double taxation system of making those in work pay extra money through national insurance tax. We've also made very clear, Mr. Speaker, that we will only make tax cuts when we afford them, because on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we don't believe in making unfunded promises in order to try and buy votes.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
More than 1 in 4 children in Wales lives in poverty. Devolution has the capacity to transform people's lives, but the current First Minister is distracted with questions about his integrity, deleting messages and taking dodgy donations. 25 years since the start of devolution, does the Secretary of State agree with me that governments at both ends of the N4 need to recommit to integrity and transparency?
Speaker, I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady that this government and this political party are completely committed towards integrity. And I think it's high time... Oh, Mr. Speaker, they're laughing, Mr. Speaker. Their own First Minister took £200,000 from a convicted criminal. A convicted criminal who had received £400,000 from a bank for which he was responsible, went in front of the COVID committee and said that all the messages on his phone had been accidentally deleted by the IT department. But now we see a screenshot where he urges people to delete their messages so they can't be FOI'd, and they have the audacity to sit there laughing when people ask questions about standards. So the Honourable Lady, I say the Honourable Lady makes a very good point. Let's collapse the coalition and stop supporting the Welsh Labour government, and then we can get a decent government with decent values running Wales.
Savile Roberts.
My party seeks to make a difference to the lives of the people of Wales, but when it comes to the Secretary of State's judgment in relation to the First Minister, yes, we are for once in agreement. But this screams hypocrisy. The Tories in the Senedd voted against a Plaid Cymru motion to set a cap on political donations. His party has still not returned a £10 million donation from a man who made racist and misogynistic remarks. In that spirit of open democracy, will the Secretary of State support a cap on donations to political parties?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to sit here and start making up policy on the hoof, but what I would say to the Honourable Lady, and I think she'd agree with this, is that I would not have taken hundreds of thousands of pounds in donations from somebody who'd been convicted twice of environmental offences. And if the Labour Party are happy with that, that is a matter for them, Mr. Speaker.
A four, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, can I thank my right honourable friend for his work as chair of the Environmental Audit Committee. The UK Government's River Wye Action Plan will halt ongoing decline of the River Wye to preserve and restore this treasured river to the rating of favourable condition.
As the Minister's already said, the environment is a devolved matter, but nobody seems to have told the River Wye, which rises in Wales and crosses the border to emerge into the River Severn in England. I very much welcome the River Wye Action Plan, which DEFRA has announced recently. Has my honourable friend seen any action taken by the Welsh Government to match the UK Government's commitment to clean up the polluted River Wye?
In the interest of time, Mr. Speaker, I'll give you a very short answer. No. The Welsh Government has failed to come to the table time and time again on this issue, which is close to my heart as a constituency MP for the River Wye itself. That has been the missing piece of the puzzle, and that is why we are seeing no action in Wales.
Teresa Villiers.
Number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, healthcare is devolved to the Welsh Government, who have received record levels of funding to deliver on all their devolved responsibilities, receiving 20% more funding per person than in England.
Teresa Villiers.
So many people in Wales are waiting longer for NHS care than they are in England. And in a 12-month period, 40,000 people had to go from Wales to England for elective care. Doesn't it show that Labour claims to be better for the NHS are completely false?
My right honourable friend is entirely right. The NHS is not safe under Labour's hands, and we have living proof of that in Wales. I think it is a great shame that when the Secretary of State for Health in England offered the support of the NHS in England to alleviate pressures on waiting times in Wales, the Welsh Health Secretary turned that down. That is Labour's record on the NHS.
Sir Christopher Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the problems a lot of my constituents have raised with me is that when they do get a letter calling them for an appointment, including ones where they've been waiting for some time, the letter arrives after the appointment date because the Royal Mail is now delivering such an appalling service. Isn't it time we really had a strong words to make sure that people who are being called for appointments get a chance to turn up to them because they've actually had the letter on time?
The right honourable gentleman makes a good point, one which I will certainly investigate with colleagues, but I think the problem lies with the mismanagement of the Welsh NHS, for which his party must take responsibility.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government recognises the importance of victims having access to the support they need to recover from the impact of crime. That is why we are quadrupling funding for victim services, up from £41 million in 2010.
Mr. Speaker, as a recent victim of crime, the impact on the victim makes you reflect on the impact on the victim, but also on how many crimes remain unresolved. Latest figures show that 9 in 10 crimes in Wales went unsolved in the last 6 months. So what can the Minister say to the victims of the 82,000 reported crimes that went uncharged last year?
Can I firstly say how sorry I am to learn that the Honourable Lady has been a victim of crime. I know the experience she's gone through, and I personally send her my huge sympathies. This government has a proud record in delivering on victims of crime, whether that's new pieces of legislation or the record headcount of police officers. Unfortunately, it was the Welsh Government who chose to reduce the numbers of police community support officers last year, which is having an impact on victims of crime.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that we are all victims when senior Labour politicians make false and misleading statements at public inquiries?
Yes.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. It is deeply concerning that a First Minister should reveal himself to have acted in such a way which appears to be entirely contrary. I look forward to Welsh Labour members looking for further scrutiny on that issue.
Matt Weston. Stay.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 10 and 11 together. I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a range of subjects, including steelmaking in Wales. The Government is investing £500 million to retain steelmaking at Port Talbot, and not only in Port Talbot actually, but at other Tata sites, including Llanwern and Shotton, protecting 5,000 jobs and thousands more in the supply chain whilst increasing our economic security. And at the same time, the Government have put aside £80 million for the Transition Board to spend supporting anyone who loses their job in Port Talbot and the wider community.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it be the transmission pylons and lines to upgrade our power grid as demanded by the Windsor report, or the prospect of building steel-based offshore wind platforms, the Welsh steel industry can and should be central to our transition to a net zero nation. When historic investments are being made by European competitors in green steel, does the Minister recognise that it is the Government's lack of ambition for Britain that has let thousands of skilled workers down?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman makes a good point about the importance of making sure there's a grid connection to enable an electric arc furnace to work properly. And I've raised this issue with National Grid, and they've assured me that the grid connection can be made on time. He makes a second reasonable point about the importance of being able to use steel produced in Port Talbot for floating offshore wind turbines. That is not the case at the moment because, as some of his shadow frontbenchers seem to be unaware of, the steel made in Port Talbot is coil, which is too thin to make floating offshore wind turbines. The Honourable Gentleman will be pleased to know that there are discussions going on with one major investor to try and ensure that the steel produced from the arc furnace can be made in a way that could support floating offshore wind structures.
Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The sustainability of domestic automotive manufacturing is vital to the future prosperity of Luton's local economy. So what discussions has the Minister had with the UK's automotive industry about the effect of losing our sovereign virgin steel production on their supply chain costs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've had a number of discussions. Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with the automotive industry. I've also had regular discussions with the steel industry across the United Kingdom. 90% of the grades that are currently produced by Port Talbot can be produced using an electric arc furnace. And there is work going on to ensure that the other 10% can be. But can I just remind the Honourable Lady that we actually have a plan for Port Talbot. When Tata came to us, they were looking to close down Port Talbot, to pull out of the United Kingdom, and it's a move that would have cost 8,000 jobs and 12,500 in the wider supply chain. As a result of that, the UK Conservative government stepped forward with £500 million of investment to support an electric arc furnace and a further £80 million to support retraining workers and to support infrastructure improvements in Port Talbot. We have had not one single penny from the Welsh Labour government, who instead have decided today to prioritise spending £120 million on more Senedd members. More Senedd members or support for steelworkers. I know what my priority is, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to questions to Prime Minister Kirsten Oswald.
Question 1, please.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in congratulating John Swinney on becoming SNP leader and Scottish First Minister. I look forward to working constructively with him to deliver for the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At last week's Prime Minister's questions, I highlighted the shocking rise in the number of teenagers trying vaping, and I asked the Prime Minister if he would take decisive action to stop vape advertising on football strips. He declined to do that. Since then, I have had an exchange with the Scottish Chief Medical Officer, Professor Sir Gregor Smith, during a session of the Tobacco and Vapes Bill Committee, and he said, "Where I become very uncomfortable and I am not supportive is where the massive attraction of sports companies is used in a way that promotes behaviours that are known to be unsafe or unhealthy." Can I ask the Prime Minister again, does he still think that it is right that vape companies should sponsor football kits?
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the Honourable Lady agrees with me and the Government that we should do more to tackle youth vaping, and that's why we are bringing forward measures in the new bill to restrict the availability and appeal of vapes to children specifically, whether that's flavours or indeed marketing. As she knows, advertising of vapes is already heavily restricted by UK regulations, including a ban on advertising on television and radio and most online. Now, we've seen football take positive voluntary action in the past on issues such as this, but I will say to her that the Government will respond to the Honourable Lady's specific amendment in the usual way.
Cheryl Merritt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Officer in the Armed Forces. In recent weeks, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has announced plans to control welfare and get people back to work, to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, and pass legislation to get flights off to Rwanda. Does he agree with me that these are all issues that real people like my constituents in South East Cornwall care about, and that the Leader of the Opposition should do the right thing and back them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for her local area. And can I also thank her daughter for her service in the armed forces? And she's right, I'm not surprised that the Labour Party don't back our plans to stop the boats. I'm not surprised they don't back our plans to get people into work and reform welfare. But I do think that they should do the right thing when it comes to the security of our nation, and that's back our plans to increase defence spending and give our brave armed forces personnel the resources they need to keep us safe.
We now come to Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I warmly welcome the new member for Blackpool South? After the representation that fine town has had recently, it's good to know they've got a proper champion back at last. Can I also warmly welcome the new Labour MP for Dover to these benches? Mr. Speaker, if 1 week a Tory MP who's also a doctor says the Prime Minister can't be trusted with the NHS and joins Labour, and the next week the Tory MP for Dover, on the front line of the small boats crisis, says the Prime Minister cannot be trusted with our borders and joins Labour, what is the point of this failed government staggering on?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I actually join him in welcoming his newest MP for Blackpool? I must say he looks a lot happier than the member who was sitting there last week. But let me also join with him, and let me join with him in congratulating all new and paying tribute to all former councillors, PCCs and mayors across the country. I hope his new ones do him as proud as I am of all of mine, Mr. Speaker. Great leaders like Andy Street, who leave behind a strong legacy of more homes, more jobs and more investment, in sharp contrast to the legacy left by the last Labour government, which was a letter joking that there was no money left.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in addition to losing 2 Tory MPs in 2 weeks, the Prime Minister's been on the receiving end of some of the biggest by-election swings in history. He's also lost 1,500 Tory councillors, half of his party's mayors, and a leadership election to a lettuce. How many more times do the public and his own MPs need to reject him before he takes the hint?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this time last year I reminded him of some advice, actually, from his own mentor, Tony Blair, who had said at the time that he can be as cocky as he likes about local elections, but come a general election, it's policy that counts, Mr. Speaker. Now, one year on from that advice, what has he managed? £28 billion of tax rises, 70 new business regulations, 30 U-turns, and a deputy leader under a police investigation.
Well, I'm surprised he brought up a police investigation. I think his record is played one, no, actually two, the seatbelt as well. Played two, lost two in relation to police investigations. But it's the same. The public keep telling him, the voters tell him it's not good enough. Instead of listening, he keeps telling them everything's fine, if only they'd realise his greatness. He just doesn't get it. But at least after Thursday night, Mr. Speaker, he can go to the many places that he calls home and enjoy the fruits of his success. In Southampton or Downing Street, he's got great Labour councils. At his mansion in Richmond, he can enjoy a brand new Labour mayor of North Yorkshire. And at his pad in Kensington, he can celebrate a historic third term for the mayor of London. Now that he too can enjoy the benefits of this changed Labour Party, is he really still in such a hurry to get back to California?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must say I was of course surprised to see the honourable gentleman in North Yorkshire, but probably not as surprised as he was when he realised he couldn't take the tube there, Mr. Speaker. But I can tell him that the people of North Yorkshire believe in hard work, secure borders, lower taxes, and straight-talking common sense, Mr. Speaker. They're not going to get any of that from a virtue-signalling lawyer from North London.
Well, it was great to be in Northallerton, where they just voted to reject the Prime Minister's proposition. Mr. Speaker, he's finally found something in common with the British public. No matter where he calls home, all his neighbours are backing this changed Labour Party. And they keep rejecting him because they have sussed him out. They know there's nothing behind the boasts, the gimmicks, the smug smile. He's a dodgy salesman, desperate to sell them a dud. Now, Mr. Speaker, 16 days ago, when he held a press conference claiming victory on Rwanda, he said the next few weeks will be about action. People want deeds, not words. So let's test that. How many small boat crossings have there been since he said that 16 days ago?
Mr. Speaker, actually, just before we go on to that, he talked about a changed Labour Party. That's important because he talked about a changed Labour Party. He talks about it a lot. But just this morning, and he also talked about his new mayor in London. So just this morning, we've learned that the Labour mayor in London believes, and I quote, that there is an equivalence between the brutal terrorist attack of Hamas and Israel defending itself. And let me be crystal clear. There is absolutely no equivalence between a terrorist coup and a democratic state. So can I ask him now, will he take this opportunity to demonstrate that Labour Party has changed? And will he condemn those comments from the Labour mayor?
Well, I know that was the last run out before the general election, but he's getting ahead of himself in asking me questions. But Mr. Speaker, I notice he didn't even attempt to answer the question. He knows the answer. Since he claimed victory 16 days ago, there have been a staggering 2,400 small boat crossings. 2,400! That's a gimmick, not a deterrent. And those 2,400 will be added to the Tories' asylum perma-backlog, which is forecast to rise to 100,000 by the end of this year. Now, the Prime Minister pretends he will remove them all to Rwanda. but Rwanda can only take a few hundred a year. At that rate, the Prime Minister's grand plan would take over 300 years to remove them all. Mr. Speaker, that's tens of thousands of people with their claims going unprocessed, who are going to be here for their entire lifetime living in hotels at the taxpayers' expense. It is absurd to call that anything other than an amnesty handed to them by the Tory party, isn't it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he had the opportunity to condemn the comments of his mayor, a mayor who said that there is an equivalence between Hamas and Israel. He did not do that, and everyone will see what that is. That is the Change Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, right there. But since I became Prime Minister, small boat crossings are down by a third. That's because we've doubled NCA funding, increased enforcement rates, closed bank accounts, deported 24,000 people, processed more claims, and, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to border control, there is a crucial difference between us. We want secure borders. He's happy with open borders.
Mr. Speaker, the whole country knows that removing less than 1% of asylum seekers isn't stopping the boats, it's granting an amnesty, a Tory amnesty. But if he thinks the voters are wrong, if he thinks his own MPs joining the Labour Party are wrong, if he thinks anyone believes any of the nonsense that he spouts, why doesn't he put it to the test and call a general election?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about removing people. This is a person who campaigned to stop the deportation of foreign national offenders, Mr. Speaker. It shows how out of touch his values are with the British people. But, Mr. Speaker, it's yet another week where we hear nothing about his plan to do anything on the issues that matter to the country. Meanwhile, we're getting on, reforming welfare and getting people into work. He opposes it. We're controlling migration, legal and illegal. He opposes it. And as we heard, Mr. Speaker, we are boosting defence spending to strengthen our country. He opposes it, and that's the difference. He snipes from the sidelines. The Conservatives are building a brighter future.
When it comes to small boat crossings, there's a lot of talk of human rights. But surely the only human right and life that matters is the life of children who are being taken across the Channel. In this respect, will the government now do the only thing that will actually be a real deterrence, and that is to arrest and detain all those who land illegally on our shores and then offshore them promptly, so that once and for all we can save lives and end this cruel and callous trade?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is right that these crossings are incredibly dangerous and they risk people's lives. Just weeks ago, a 7-year-old girl died attempting the crossing, and that's why, as a matter of basic compassion, we must do everything we can to break the cycle of the criminal gangs. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, you need a deterrent. That's what the National Crime Agency say. That's how we dealt with illegal migrants from Albania, because it's only by removing people who shouldn't be here that we remove the reason for them to come in the first place. And that is how we'll control our borders. And it's clear that it's only this party that not only has a plan to stop the boats, but has a plan to stop the tragic loss of life in the Channel too.
SNP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by also congratulating the fantastic John Swinney on becoming Scotland's first Minister. Our opponents should be careful, very careful what they wish for. Mr. Speaker, as we await the imminent Israeli incursion into Rafah, where 1.2 million people are sheltering, including 600,000 children, it has been reported that the United States has paused an arms shipment to Israel. The UK will now follow suit, won't it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman may not realise, but the UK government doesn't itself directly provide arms or ship arms to Israel. And when it comes to the situation in Rafah, I've been very clear that we are deeply concerned about a full military incursion of Rafah, given the devastating humanitarian impact. I've made that position and point specifically to Prime Minister Netanyahu whenever we've spoken, and will continue to urge all sides to focus on the negotiations at hand, to bring about a pause in the conflict, to release hostages and get more aid in.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, let's be clear. The confidence that Israel has shown in its military ambitions in Rafah stems from the silence which has been shown from its allies on the front benches in this place and indeed elsewhere across the world. Now, we all know that UK arms and tech is supporting Israel's activities in Gaza and will be used in any attack on Rafah. Knowing that and the devastation which is going to occur, surely the time has come to end our complicity and to halt arms sales to Israel.
Well, Mr Speaker, of course we take our defence export responsibilities extremely seriously, and that's why we operate one of the most robust licensing control regimes anywhere in the world. We periodically review advice on Israel's commitment to international humanitarian law, and ministers always act in accordance with that advice. And that is crystal clear for the House to understand. Our position with regard to export licences following the most recent assessment is unchanged, and I know that he will join me in urging all parties to engage in the negotiations that are happening so we can see a pause in fighting, to get more aid in, hostages out, and then bring about a sustainable ceasefire to this conflict.
Martin Bickers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituents in rural villages and on the fringes of the Grimsby-Cleethorpes urban area are very concerned about overdevelopment. They recognise that the highway infrastructure and public services are already overloaded. Could my right honourable friend consider amending planning guidance so that local plans and decisions taken by local planning authorities are not overridden by planning inspectors? And they'd be greatly encouraged if he would agree to meet with me and my colleagues from the neighbouring Gainsborough and Grimsby constituencies to discuss this further.
My honourable friend is right that sustainable development must be at the heart of the planning system, and that's why we're committed to meeting the needs for housing by building the right homes in the right places and protecting the environmental assets that matter most. The National Planning Policy Framework is clear that we should be responsive to local circumstances. I know that the relevant local plan in my honourable friend's area is due for further consultation later this year, and that he'll engage with that process, but I will happily meet with him and colleagues to discuss his situation further.
Ed Davey.
Mr Speaker, the abuse suffered by 88-year-old Anne King at the hands of staff in her care home was captured on a hidden camera. The footage is stomach-churning. Anne died in October 2022, and it took nearly a year before the CQC launched a criminal investigation. Now Anne's children are working to protect other care home residents from being subjected to such appalling abuse. Her son came to see me as his MP to ask for my help in their campaign. So will the Prime Minister join me in backing Anne's Law, a proposal to include a national register to professionalise the care workforce and hold those staff who are abusive to account? And will he meet with Anne's family and myself to discuss this idea?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I first of all extend my sympathies to Anne's family for what she went through. Obviously, that's not appropriate, and I'll make sure that the department engages with him and Anne's family on the proposed law. And he's right to say we should have high standards across the care industry, and we're walking towards more investment to support our care home staff, making sure that they have training, qualification to development, and we have a regime in place that can hold everyone to account for delivering the high standards that we would all expect.
Sarah Downs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that one of the greatest things that these backbenches bring to Westminster is plain old-fashioned common sense? And it's Derbyshire common sense. Derbyshire common sense that means that the good people of Ashbourne and surrounding villages reject the Sadiq Khan ULEZ rules and even the 20 miles an hour Welsh. Will he join with me and perhaps ask his neighbour if he will pay for the Ashbourne bypass?
Well, Mr Speaker, I know my honourable friend has been a dedicated campaigner for the Ashbourne bypass, and the government is committed to investing more in the Midlands, particularly investing every penny of the 9.6 billion from HS2 back into the local area. And she's right that we will focus on drivers and their priorities, not continue the war on motorists, which is waged by the Labour Mayor in London, but also the Labour Party in Wales, with both ULEZ and 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. It's this party that is unashamedly on the side of the motorist.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Our Child of the North cross-party group found that expectant mothers were terminating unwanted pregnancies as they could not afford another mouth to feed. Recent figures show infant and child death rates have increased in the most deprived areas, and 50 children have died alone in unregulated accommodation. Is this his plan for a brighter Britain in action?
Mr. Speaker, obviously what the Honourable Lady has described is tragedy. Nobody wants to see children grow up in those circumstances, and that's why I'm proud that the government has overseen a significant fall in poverty, but particularly child poverty, since 2010 through a range of measures, and I'll make sure that she is aware for her constituents of all the support that is in place, both through the Department of Health and through the Department for Work and Pensions and local authorities, to provide support to the most vulnerable families in our communities.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, Weston-super-Mare is a growing town, so local health services are rightly growing too. Weston Hospital is treating more patients for a wider variety of problems than before. GP surgeries are offering thousands more appointments this year than last, and our new diagnostic centre means faster tests and treatments. But there's a fly in our NHS prescribed ointment. Dentistry isn't fixed yet. The new dental recovery plan is very welcome, but when will it mean appointments that Westonians can book?
Mr. Speaker, our dentistry recovery plan will make dental services faster, simpler and fairer for patients, funding around 2.5 billion more appointments. And I was pleased to note that access is improving in my honourable friend's area, with almost 10% more children seeing a dentist in June last year than the previous year. But we are going further. The new patient premium that was announced last year is ensuring that more NHS dentistry will be provided. And since then, at the end of January, 500 more practices have said that they are now open to new patients.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now been over a month since the Parliamentary Ombudsman delivered a long-awaited report on pension injustices. Yet women born in the 1950s in my constituency of Dundee, and indeed every constituency in this House across these islands, are still waiting to hear if the UK Government will listen to these recommendations and deliver compensation. Mr. Speaker, I was proud to see the Scottish Parliament support a motion last week calling for compensation to be delivered without delay, but utterly dismayed to see members of the Conservative Party and the Labour Party abstain. So can the Prime Minister finally set out when WSPI women will receive the compensation they rightly deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I understand the strong feelings across the chamber on this topic and the desire for urgency in addressing them. However, following the Ombudsman's 5-year investigation, it is imperative that we take the time to thoroughly review the comprehensive findings that have been published. An update to the House will be provided once the report's findings have been fully considered. More broadly, we are committed to ensuring pensioners have the dignity and security in retirement that they deserve, and most recently increasing the state pension by £900 thanks to the triple lock.
Sir Philip Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister as appalled as I am at reports of militant civil servant, trade union, political activists seeking to find ways not to implement the Rwanda deportations? Does he agree with me that if they are not prepared to implement the will of the government, an Act of Parliament that was passed by both Houses of Parliament, that they should conclude that being in the civil service is perhaps not for them, and maybe they can look for alternative employment at other left-wing organisations that masquerade as being impartial? Maybe they could try the BBC or Channel 4 News.
Mr. Speaker, my expectation is that civil servants will continue to be committed to supporting our priority of stopping the boats and deliver in accordance with the Civil Service Code. He'll know that we made specific changes to ensure compliance with that code as we push through with our plans. But I agree with him more broadly that we are the only party that has a plan to stop the boats, and we will face down all the obstacles in our way to deliver on this crucial priority for the British people. And whoever stands in our way, whether it's the Labour Party or others, we will deliver for this country on this vital issue.
Malcolm McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, China has now hacked the data of defence personnel, the Electoral Commission, various other public institutions, and has targeted many members of this House. And yet plans by China's largest wind turbine manufacturer, Mingyang Smart Energy, to build its largest European facility right here in the UK advance at pace, with the facility set to be built in Scotland. Given widely shared concerns about the involvement of hostile states such as China in the UK's critical national energy infrastructure, does he not agree that now is the time for this project to be paused, to be reviewed by the government on national security grounds? And if not, what message does he think that sends?
Well, as I've said repeatedly, China is a country with different values to ours and is acting in a way that is increasingly authoritarian at home and assertive abroad. It's right that we take firm steps to protect ourselves against that, particularly in the area of economic security, which is why this government passed the National Security and Investment Act, precisely so that we can screen transactions without commenting on individual ones, of course, to protect this country. And we have used those powers, not least to block Chinese investment in a sensitive semiconductor company, but also to ensure that the Chinese state nuclear company had no part in the future of our nuclear power. So he can rest assured that we're alive to the challenges and have passed laws that give us the powers to protect against them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 5-year-old Benedict Blythe was a lovely little boy who attended a primary school in my constituency. Sadly, however, he died of anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction. The coroner's inquest has not yet reported, but speaking generally, on average, 2 children in every class have a food allergy, and allergic reactions take place more in school than in any other setting outside the home. Severe allergic reactions are on the rise and can be fatal. Yet there is no explicit legal requirement for schools to have allergy medication, an allergy policy, or other recommended safeguards being made available. There is only guidance. Will the Prime Minister meet with me and Benedict's parents, Helen and Pete, so that we can discuss a way forward to ensure that children who suffer from allergies in schools can be more safe, including schools having an allergy policy, adrenaline pens, and staff who know how to use them?
Well, firstly, can I extend my sympathy to Benedict's family? It's tragic always to hear about the loss of a child, and we fully understand the seriousness of severe allergies and believe that children with medical conditions should be properly supported to enjoy a full education and be safe at school. Now, there is a legal duty on the governing body of schools to make arrangements for supporting pupils, including setting out what needs to be done, symptoms, treatment, but I will ensure that my right honourable friend gets a meeting with the Health Secretary to discuss how we could further support pupils with serious allergies.
Yesterday, his Chancellor confirmed that it's government policy to abolish national insurance, a £46 billion annual cost, and no indication of where the money's coming from. So can the Prime Minister rule out further freezes on tax allowances or an 8p increase in income tax to pay for it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's total nonsense, and of course I rule that out. And let me just clear up. Mr. Speaker, there is no unfunded policy. What we have said is that we have a long-term ambition to keep cutting national insurance to end the unfairness of the double taxation on work. We'll make progress towards that goal in the next Parliament, just as we already have in this, by cutting national insurance by a third in 6 months, delivering a £900 tax cut, at the same time is increasing investment in the NHS and increasing the state pension. But it's increasingly clear what this reveals is that the Labour Party opposes tax cuts for working people.
Angela Richardson.
Thank you. Empowering local pharmacies is a key part of this government's plan to cut waiting lists. In Guildford, we recently lost 2 neighbouring pharmacies. But good news, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to report that by working diligently with local pharmacists, concerned residents, the Minister and the ICB, I have helped to secure a new pharmacy in Burford. Yeah. Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming this new pharmacy, and does he agree that it is vital residents should have access to a good, efficient and above all local pharmacy? Yeah.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I care deeply about the future of our community pharmacies. I'm very pleased to hear about my honourable friend's success in securing a new pharmacy for her constituents, joining the 10,500 others across the country. And she's now right about the important role that our local pharmacies can play. That's why we're backing them with £645 million of additional funding through Pharmacy First, so that you can now go straight to your pharmacist, receive treatment for 7 of the most common ailments, saving you time and ensuring that patients get the care they need quicker and closer to home.
Mr. Speaker, last Friday, The Guardian reported major structural deficiencies at Stepping Hill Hospital in Stockport. Stepping Hill's major outpatients building, the radiology department and the critical care unit have all been condemned. In March, I met with senior officials at Stockport NHS Trust. They were very clear that a sustained lack of capital investment is the root cause of problems at my local hospital. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister believe that our hospitals, quite literally crumbling, is the price worth paying for the 14 years of successive Conservative failure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we fully recognise the need to invest in health infrastructure across the country, including at Stepping Hill Hospital, and that's why we are currently spending around £4 billion a year for Trust to spend on necessary maintenance and repairs, on top of the £20 billion new hospital programme and the additional funding that was put aside to deal with RAC maintenance. But he talks about a legacy of the NHS. All he needs to do is look at his party's record in Wales, where people currently are experiencing the worst A&E performance and the longest wait times anywhere in Great Britain.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Nottingham City Council is expecting to fall short of its housing target by 6,000 new homes. Last time this happened, Rushcliffe, as a neighbouring authority, was forced to take thousands of homes on top of its own housing target, which led to huge pressures on our green spaces and public services. So can my right honourable friend reassure me and my constituents that the changes we've made to the planning system will mean that this time we will be protected from Labour's failure in Nottingham?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, and while on this side of the House the Conservatives believe in building the right homes in the right places with local people having a say, all Labour would do is impose top-down housing targets on areas, decimating our precious countryside. And in Nottinghamshire, as she says, you can see the difference, Mr. Speaker, between the well-run Conservative County Council compared to the bankrupt Nottingham Council, which has left residents to pick up the bill from their profligacy.
Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Untreated sewage was pumped into English waterways for more than 3.6 million hours last year, and into the sea off Sussex beaches 3 times in the last 24 hours alone. Yet since privatisation, the water companies have been allowed to rack up debts of over £64 billion and their shareholders to pocket £78 billion in dividends. The majority of the public, including 58% of Conservative and 80% of Labour supporters, want to turf out the profiteering polluters. They want water brought back into public hands. When is he going to listen to them and end the legalised scam of privatisation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our plans have gone further than any other previous government. In fact, we now monitor 100% of overflows, up from just 7% under the Labour Party. We're investing a record £56 billion into our water infrastructure, and we've enshrined in law strict targets and introduced unlimited fines for water companies, holding them and their bosses to account. So it's crystal clear that the record shows that there's only one party who has a clear plan to tackle this issue for the environment, and it's the Conservative Party.
Final question, Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everybody knows that Stockton is a great place with great people and a great football team. My right honourable friend recently visited the mighty Stockton town to see the incredible work that they do in the local community and heard about their promotion battle. I'm sure he'll want to join me in congratulating Mickey Dunwell and the mighty Anchors on their promotion.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was fantastic to visit Stockton Town FC with my honourable friend, who is a brilliant champion for his local community, which I see firsthand on a weekly basis. And let me join him in congratulating everyone at the club on their well-deserved promotion, and I hope some of their good luck rubs off on Southampton in the coming weeks.
Very agree with that. That completes Prime Minister's questions. We now come to the urgent question. I call Shabana Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Justice if he will make a statement on the expansion of the end of custody supervised licence scheme.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable lady for her question. Protecting the public is our #1 priority, and so it is right we take the tough and decisive action so we can keep putting the most serious offenders behind bars and for longer, as the public would rightly expect. We are carrying out the biggest prison expansion programme since the Victorian era and ramping up removals of foreign national offenders. We have a duty to make sure that the prison system continues to operate in a safe and effective way where offenders are held in safe and decent conditions. This means making sure that no prison exceeds a safe maximum operating limit. ECSL allows lower level offenders to be released before their automatic release date. In March, the Lord Chancellor stated that we will work with the police, prisons and probation leaders to make adjustments as required. This extension is in line with what he said. ECSL operates only when it is absolutely necessary and is kept under constant review. I know that many members of this House will be concerned about the early release of offenders into the community, but let me be clear that only offenders who would soon be released anyway would be considered for ECSL. We have put in place safeguards, including that the prison service retains the discretion to prevent the ECSL release of any offender where releasing them earlier presents a heightened risk than if they were released at their automatic release date. There are strict eligibility criteria, and anyone convicted of a sexual offence, terrorist offence or a serious violent offence is ruled out. Public safety will always be our #1 priority, and all those released will still be subject to probation, supervision and stringent licence conditions.
Shabana Mahmood.
Mr. Speaker, here we go again. Never in this country has a government ever been forced to release prisoners over 2 months early. This is the price that the public is paying for a justice system in crisis and a government in freefall. In just 6 months, the early release scheme, Mr. Speaker, has now undergone 3 major extensions. It was quietly started in October when the government began releasing prisoners up to 18 days early. In March, it was slipped out that it was expanded from 18 days to 60. And now it has emerged through a media leak that it has been extended once again, this time to 70 days. And worst of all, the government is doing all of this in secret. They haven't responded to any FOI requests, parliamentary questions, or even the Justice Select Committee with any useful details about this scheme. The government is releasing prisoners, but not the facts. The strategy is clear for all to see. Say nothing, try and get away with it, and get to the other side of the general election. It's shameless and frankly a disgrace. The public and this House rightly expect the Minister to be transparent and honest. So let's see if he'll answer these basic and simple questions. Why the increase of early release to 70 days? How many offenders have been released in the 6 months since the scheme became operational? How will they ensure that probation has the time and the resources to adequately assess risk and protect the public? And will he give a guarantee to the House today that this secretive scheme will not be extended again?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for her question. I would gently say to her a number of things. First of all, I think her suggesting sneaking it out in October and March, which included statements to this House, was entirely transparent. In terms of the Honourable Lady's party's record, I think operating an early release scheme for 3 years between 2007 and 2010 would leave her on rather shaky ground. She talked about a media leak. This was an operational decision with operational guidance sent out to HMPPS, to prison governors, as well as other stakeholders, including, if I recall, the probation union, for a minor change which was already reflected in the points made by my right honourable friend in March to this House. She talked about data. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has been consistently clear. We will publish the data on an annualised basis in exactly the same way as we do, for example, on deaths in custody and supplementary breakdowns of the prison population. We've been clear. We will always ensure that the prison system has the spaces to ensure that the courts can send people to prison. We are making an appropriate operational decision to ensure that continues to be the case. And she also asked about probation, and rightly so. And I suspect in our exchange, the one thing where we may find ourselves in agreement is paying tribute to those who work in our probation service. As she will know, since 2021, we have increased the budget for the probation service by £155 million, with 4,000 additional probation officers in training. We have worked with the leadership of our probation service on this scheme. And as I say, in terms of notifying people about the changes to the guidance, the operational guidance, the probation union was one of those we did notify.
Select Committee, Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. This is in reality, Mr. Speaker. This is actually a perfectly rational and sensible, pragmatic response to the pressures in our prisons, and the Minister should take credit for having done that, but I would ask him to reconsider the point about transparency of data, precisely because it is a sensible thing to do. There's no reason why we shouldn't release the figures in greater time. But isn't there an underlying problem here that both parties in this House, all parties, have to face up to, that the pressures in our prisons, which the Justice Committee has referred to repeatedly, stem from decades of underfunding by governments of all parties, that prison at 46,000+ pounds a year for each place is a very expensive way of dealing with people and not always the best means for lower level offenders. Can we have a more intelligent debate about sentencing and the purpose of prison? And perhaps we could start with that by the Minister committing to bringing back the sentencing bill, which will enable us to have a more nuanced approach to this.
I'm grateful to my honourable and learned friend for his questions. He's right to highlight the ongoing capacity challenges and a number of drivers of those. One of those, as he highlights, is that, for example, the average custodial sentence in this country has gone up from 14 months to, I think, about 21 months. The remand population has gone up from about 9,000 to about 16,500, partly as a result of the COVID backlogs in the court system, partly as a result of the bar strike and the impact that that had on that. So he's right to highlight the drivers of this. In respect of publication of data, I would very gently, in the case of my honourable friend, very respectfully refer him to the answer I gave to his committee and at the dispatch box just now. But it's also important that alongside recognising the pressures the system's under, we are taking the steps to increase capacity, both through increasing removals of foreign national offenders and at a faster rate, but also having built almost 6,000 new prison places, in stark contrast to the record of the party opposite, who built not one of the 7,500 Titan prison places.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Court backlogs are sky high. Prisons are dangerously close to capacity, which is why we've had to see this policy implemented. And the government is claiming, the minister's just claimed, to be carrying out a big prison expansion programme, yet its record is appalling. In 2016, the government, in response to the Taylor Review, committed to building 2 secure schools for young offenders. Since then, the budget has spiralled out of control and not one of those schools has opened. Doesn't this all just prove that the Conservatives can't be trusted with our justice system?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she knows I have a huge amount of respect for her, but I think even by Lib Dem standards that was stretching the bounds of credibility a little, not least, as she will be aware, we've built 2 new prisons. We have 3 that have now completed, 1 in construction, 2 have now completed planning, 1 is currently subject to a planning appeal. And in respect to the secure school, I think she should look forward to that opening in a matter of days.
Rob Battle. Mr. Speaker, can I ask my honourable friend to expand a little bit on the great improvements that are being made to increase capacity? Can he tell us a little bit more about progress in ensuring that more foreign national offenders are removed to their own countries? And can he also expand a little, since it seems to be very badly understood by those on the other side of the House of all parties, quite how much of a programme we have got on this side of the House for prison building, the number of different prisons, the number of spaces that that will create, and therefore the prospect for rehabilitation of offenders and consequently, in time, fewer victims of crime?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight that, and I pay tribute to his work in the justice system, not only in this House, but prior to his being a member of this House. In respect of FNO removals, I believe, and of course I'll correct it if I'm slightly out, around 16,000 FNOs have now been removed, and it's timely that, as I say that, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, appears, so I can pay tribute to him and his department for their work in delivering that. In terms of prison places, as I set out to the honourable lady, the member for Twickenham, progress on the 6 new prisons, but alongside that, of course, we've built a vast number of rapid deployment cells, new house blocks. So we are expanding our prison capacity rapidly, and as I say, that stands in stark contrast to the failure to deliver on the Titan prison places by the party opposite.
Rebecca Longvale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The National Association of Probation Officers have said that the ESCL scheme is an unmitigated failure and has not only been extended without parliamentary scrutiny, but represents an increasing risk to public safety. The Secretary knows our probation service is in crisis, and it cannot cope without a significant increase in support and resources. Will the government be providing this?
Very grateful to the honourable lady, and I have, as I said, and share the view with the Shadow Secretary of State, great respect for the work done by those who work in our probation service, and indeed have met with the probation unions in the past, and although we don't always agree, I do have huge respect for the work that those unions do in representing their members. But I would make 2 points. Firstly, to say that it was done without scrutiny in this House, I think, is stretching the bounds of credibility. 2 statements by my right honourable friend, multiple oral parliamentary question sessions, and indeed myself undergoing a polite but thorough grilling in the Justice Select Committee by the chair of the Select Committee. So I don't think it stacks up to say that this has not been subject to scrutiny. To her underlying point, however, as I set out earlier, We are investing in probation, £155 million additional investment a year since 2021, and 4,000 more probation officers and probation staff in training.
Mr. Speaker, just a moment ago, the Minister set out the significant increase in the number of people being held on remand. I think he said from 9 to 16,000. Could the Minister just set out to the House the work that the government is doing to address the court backlogs and what steps he's taking to look at other routes for monitoring people who are on remand, who perhaps could serve that remand period in the community under a tagging system?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I think, actually, to correct myself, it's actually, I think, 16,500 now on remand out of the prison population. In terms of court backlogs, we have increased investment in our courts, we've increased the number of sitting days, and we are seeing progress being made. In terms of what we can do, though, to help give the courts, who obviously make the decision on whether to remand or whether to bail someone, the information they need, we continue to invest in the Bail Information Service, which gives the sentencer the reassurance, hopefully, and the information they need to make a judgment call as to whether someone is safe to be bailed. And we're increasing our investment in the CAS, the Community Accommodation Service, to make sure where someone may not be bailed because they don't have a stable address to go to, there is an increased opportunity for them to have that address to give sentencers the opportunity to bail them.
My God, very sure.
Mr. Speaker, I've been in this House long enough to, as the Minister and the Chairman of the Justice Select Committee knows, to know when something is a sticking plaster act from a government. This is, perhaps it's necessary, but it's a sticking plaster. We've had how many Queen's speeches since 2010, included in a thorough look at the justice system with a royal commission. It never happened. And we all know that you don't building prisons doesn't solve the crisis. We do need a radical reform of the whole of our justice system, and that will need extra resources and a real motivation from an incoming Labour government. Does he agree with me?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman with whom I've occasionally tussled across this chamber. And I agree with some of what he says. He won't be surprised now I don't agree with his last statement, in that, judging by the track record up to 2010, I fear it will be a case of let down by Labour were that to happen. However, I'm grateful for his typically thoughtful comments, actually, on this, and his looking at the bigger picture behind the challenges we face. It is right that we are putting those who commit the most serious crimes in prison for longer to protect society, but also to ensure that they pay their debt back to society. But it's also important we look at how we rehabilitate people when they are in prison, because we all want those who've served their time to come out and live their life within bounds in the community and be constructive and positive contributors to society. That's why we're focusing on getting people into employment. We're getting them the education they need in prison. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, the member for Hampshire East, for his work and his focus on that when he was both Secretary of State for Education, but also then as my predecessor. And of course, there are measures before this House currently, or before Parliament currently, I should say, for example, in the sentencing bill, which offer this House an opportunity to think about other ways of doing things.
Savile Roberts.
This announcement comes after 9 prisoners have recently lost their lives in HMP Park in Bridgend, and the Ministry of Justice says they won't step in. Now, a private prison in Wales is an unaccountable anomaly that fails everyone, victims and prisoners alike. And while we anticipate the long-awaited devolution of justice, can you tell me why, after 25 years, there is still no clarity over which Ombudsman is responsible for health in Park?
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable lady. While we may disagree in our proposition or our view on devolution of justice to Wales, she raises a very important issue in terms of those deaths in the past few months in HMP and YY Park. I visited Park recently and spoke to the Governor, the Director and others, both those in custody and those working in Park. I've got to be a little bit cautious about what I say, given the matter is will be before both the coroner and before the Ombudsman. What I would say is that I will be appearing before the Welsh Affairs Select Committee next week when I suspect some of this may be debated, but I've got to be a little bit careful. I'm happy to have a discussion with her, but I think it's right that I don't stray at the dispatch box when these matters are before thee.
And hopefully with the MPs whose constituents it is as well. Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his answers to all the questions. The scheme was initially designed to allow for short-term early release of a matter of days, and yet some are now facing some 70 days. Can the Minister understand why victims of crime are anxious that the so-called soft crime criminals are getting an easier time, whilst the victims of crimes are told that perpetrators have been released early so that they can prepare themselves to see them again down the town or at the local supermarket, as examples, which can be extremely disconcerting, if not unexpected? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. Just to reassure you, Mr. Speaker, the member whose constituency it is in, I was due to be meeting actually at this moment in time, but I'm before the box. I'm here at the box, but I have got a date in the diary to reschedule that, so it has been arranged as I promised at the last oral parliamentary questions session, sir. In respect of the honourable gentleman, he's right to highlight the point, and that's why when it comes to ECSL, our protections are significantly more stringent than those used by the party opposite when it ran its scheme for 3 years. Unlike the party opposite, our scheme allows governors to veto the release of any prisoner where they think early release will create a risk to victims. It also contains a number of exemptions from the scheme. It also allows for very rigorous conditions to be placed on the licence for the release, be that tagging, be that exclusion zones, be that curfews, and they will be well aware that if they breach those conditions to protect victims, they will hear the clang of the prison gate and be recalled.
That completes the urgent question. We'll allow the front bench to change over. Right, we now come to the statement. I call the Home Secretary, James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement to the House regarding measures that His Majesty Government will take in response to the reckless and dangerous activities of the Russian government across Europe and now suspected here in the UK. As reported on Friday the 26th of April, 5 individuals have been charged in connection with an investigation into alleged offences under the National Security Act as part of a counter-terrorism policing investigation. The offences relate to what was widely reported by the media as a suspected arson attack on a Ukraine-linked business in the UK. The Crown Prosecution Service has confirmed that the charges relate to alleged hostile activity in the UK in order to benefit a foreign state, namely Russia. I pay tribute to our law enforcement agencies for their quick and professional work to ensure that these charges were brought. The first charges to be brought under the new National Security Act. Measures which this government brought forward and which this House passed are already being used to keep our country safe. I also want to thank the emergency services who responded to the fire at the commercial property in London where the suspected activity took place. The charges here are serious, and it's only through good fortune that nobody was hurt. I want to reassure the House that public safety is of the utmost importance, which is why the law enforcement response has been quick and decisive. As members will appreciate, I must not say anything further on the specific case or any related case to avoid prejudicing the outcome of ongoing criminal proceedings. And I ask the House to respect this and to avoid using the debate to add to the speculation about this incident. It is vital that justice runs its course. However, I want to highlight to the House a pattern of suspected Russian activity that we are seeing across Europe. And of course, this is not the first time that we have uncovered malign activity seemingly linked to Russia in the UK in the past year. In September, 5 Bulgarian nationals were charged with conspiring to commit espionage activities in the UK on behalf of Russia. A 6th individual was later charged, and legal proceedings against all 6 are ongoing. There is a much broader pattern of Russian malign activity across Europe. These include plans for sabotage activities against military aid for Ukraine, in Germany and in Poland, espionage in Bulgaria and in Italy, cyber attacks and disinformation activities, airspace violations and GPS jamming with an impact on civil aviation. Over a number of years, we have witnessed Russia and its intelligence services engage in yet more open and more brazen attempts to undermine our security, harm our people, and interfere in our democracies. Litvinenko, Georgia, Crimea, Salisbury, Ukraine, and across Europe. And since the illegal invasion of Ukraine, the rhetoric, the threats, the accusations from Russia have only increased, as Putin seeks to justify the death and destruction that he has brought to the Ukrainian people. These activities bear all the hallmarks of a deliberate campaign by Russia designed to bring the war home across Europe and to undermine our collective resolve to support Ukraine in its fight. It will not work. As the Prime Minister said in Poland last month, we are at a turning point for European security. With our allies, we will stand firm in the face of Russian threats to the UK and to our way of life. It is why, after Salisbury, we took measures with our partners to make Europe a harder operating environment for Russian intelligence services, including the expulsion of 23 undeclared Russian intelligence officers from the UK. And it's why the UK has announced the biggest strengthening of the UK national defence in a generation, with a fully funded plan to grow the defence budget to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. And the UK and our allies will not falter in our support to Ukraine, because it is existential to the security of Europe. This is why the Prime Minister has also announced an uplift to military aid to Ukraine, bringing it to £3 billion this year, and has committed to this level of support every year until the end of the decade, or indeed longer if it is sadly still required. And we have sanctioned over 1,700 individuals, over 90% of the Russian banking sector, and over 130 oligarchs and family members with a combined net worth of £147 billion at the time of the invasion. And as of October, over £22 billion of Russian assets were reported frozen as a result of UK sanctions. These assets can no longer be taken back to Russia to fund Putin's war machine. We consider Russia's campaign to undermine our support to Ukraine unacceptable, and it is destined to fail. We must wait, of course, for the ongoing criminal cases across Europe, including here in the UK, to conclude. But given these allegations, the government will not wait to take further action to send a strong deterrence message to Russia and to further reduce its ability of the Russian intelligence services to threaten the UK. That is why today, Mr. Speaker, in conjunction with my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, I am announcing a package of measures to make clear to Russia that we will not tolerate such apparent escalations. So I can tell the House that we will expel the Russian defence attaché, who is an undeclared military intelligence officer. We will remove diplomatic premises status from several Russian-owned properties in the UK, including Seacock's House, a Russian-owned property in Sussex, and the Trade and Defence section in Highgate, which we believe have been used for intelligence purposes. And we are imposing new restrictions on Russian diplomatic visas, including capping the length of time Russian diplomats can spend in the UK. The measures we and our international partners have taken in recent years have already made the UK an extremely challenging operating environment for Russian intelligence services. These further measures that I have described will only serve to strengthen our resilience to the Russian threat. Our NATO allies share our view of Russia's alleged behaviour, as seen in the North Atlantic Council statement of last week. Russia has failed to provide any explanation for these events. In the coming days, we should expect accusations of Russophobia, conspiracy theories and hysteria from the Russian government. This is not new, and the British people and the British government will not fall for it and will not be taken for fools by Putin's bots, trolls and lackeys. Russia's explanation was totally inadequate. Our response will be resolute and firm. Our message to Russia is clear. Stop this illegal war. Withdraw your troops from Ukraine. Cease this malign activity. Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
As the Secretary of State himself noted, he referred to a live case at the beginning of his statement. This case is sub judice, and I ask other members not to refer to it in their questions. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of the statement. It is the first job of any government to keep our country safe from those who wish to do us harm, not least those who wish to undermine our democracy and everything we stand for. And we pay tribute to the remarkable work of our intelligence and security services, our law enforcement agencies at home and abroad, who strain every sinew to keep us safe. And we will always work with the government on those national security issues. The arson attack the Home Secretary describes was a very serious one. The charges now laid are important. We support the work of law enforcement in this case, and it's immensely important nothing is done to cut across that criminal justice case now. So I simply ask for the Home Secretary's reassurance that a wider investigation is underway, not just into these specific offences, but into the wider context and any wider threats to our national security that might be linked to this incident. The Home Secretary has been clear in linking these charges to Russia, and we echo the Home Secretary's strong condemnation of Russian interference and hostile activity here in the UK and throughout Europe. Repeatedly, we have seen a brazen disregard by Russia for the rule of law, for the UK, for our allies, for our domestic security. And as my right honourable friends, the shadow Foreign and Defence Secretaries, have made clear, we stand shoulder to shoulder with the government in our support for Ukraine. Any change in government will not change that strong cross-party support as we stand with our allies. Putin must be defeated in Ukraine, and Britain must stand full square behind our Ukrainian friends. Russia under Putin is a long-term, generational threat to the security of Europe, which requires a long-term response. And as my right honourable friend, the Shadow Defence Secretary, said just yesterday, the defence of the UK starts in Ukraine. But as the Home Secretary has made clear, these challenges are also to our homeland security, and that is why we support wholeheartedly the measures the Home Secretary has set out today, just as we worked on a cross-party basis with the government to pass the National Security Act, and we will work closely with them in going further. But can I ask him a few further questions about these measures and about what further measures the government may be able to take? And ask him whether he expects there to be a diplomatic response from Russia. Can I ask him also, we saw obviously to such appalling extent in Salisbury very many years ago, the willingness of Russian-sponsored actors to put the safety of British citizens and British residents at risk. We've seen the cyber threats, the threats to undermine our democracy and our economy. But I am concerned that we have known about the scale of these threats for some time, and in areas we have been too slow to respond. He has been too slow to rid the UK of illicit finance. He will know that concerns have been raised about prohibited imports of Russia-origin oil through third countries making their way to UK shores. Can he tell me what action is being taken to ensure that those sanctions are being enforced? He will know that there is real concern still that the UK is still too easy for lawyers, accountants and for the laundering of Russian money through the UK that potentially aids and abets Putin's war. The US has seized huge amounts of Russian-related assets as part of the sanctions evasion and charged over 70 individuals with sanctions evasion. Can he confirm that no one has yet been charged